Hello everyone, I'm Pierrette and this is my kitchen. Today we are making short ribs. This takes hours, but it doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be time consuming. We're gonna start them out on the stove and then we're gonna transfer them either to a crock pot or leave them on the stove and leave them on low. Start them the night before and then put them in a crock pot the next morning before work, especially if you have one that works on a timer. So this could be something that you could make that could be ready for you and your family when you get home from work. And then you just have to boil some water and pasta and you have a fabulous dinner with maybe a little vegetable or a salad on the side. So we're gonna get started. My pan is already heating and I'm just gonna add some olive oil. And the first step is to sear the meat. Now I have several packages of short ribs here because if you are gonna make short ribs, it doesn't make sense if you're not doing a pretty decent quantity unless you're just not gonna eat them all, but we will definitely eat them all in this house. So I'm just gonna take my short ribs. I have a little bit of olive oil in the bottom and we're just looking to put a nice sear on them. So I'm going to separate them so that they are touching the bottom of the pan, and I'm starting with meat side down. Now they do have a little bit of a skin on them and you can remove that if you want. I'm not going to do that today just to save some time. So I'm going to let those go for a couple of minutes and I will check on them and I'll show you what that looks like. Hang tight. These are starting to sound like a big bowl of Rice Krispies. Snap, crackle, pop. I'm gonna add a little bit of seasoning while they're cooking. I'm gonna save the bay leaves for when I get the sauce into them. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of rosemary. Yeah, that looks about right. And I will do this with each group of meat that I'm cooking. So there will be 3 or 4 batches to get all of this browned before I can put it on into one big pot for cooking. We're gonna go with a half a teaspoon of oregano as well. And again, this will be per batch. And then I'm also gonna do some fennel seed, but fennel has a very strong flavor. It's sort of licorice tasting, but it's really, really good with meat, and I love it in soup. But I'm only gonna do a quarter of a teaspoon because we can always go in and add more, but if it overpowers it, then it's too late. You can't take it out. I just wanted to show you what these look like. We added so far fennel and rosemary and a little bit of oregano. That color is going to give you so much flavor. Things are happening pretty fast right now. I have done the first batch of short ribs and I'm going to pull out the second batch, which is right here. And again, they just have absolutely beautiful color on them. I also want to show you what the bottom of the pot looks like because we are going to utilize all the yummy scrapings on the bottom of the pot. I've turned off the heat, but I wanted you to see this. All of those little pieces and parts from the spices, from the meat, the caramelization, we're going to save that, but we're not quite ready yet. So what I did, I put a second batch of meat on the stove. And we're going to pull that batch out. This was actually a third batch in a second pot. And again, beautiful sear on all of these pieces. And more goodies in the bottom of the pan. So that this doesn't go to waste, I'm going to saute my onions in there. So I'm going to take my onions, This pan is nice and hot. And this is one large, very large, this was the size of a grapefruit almost. One large onion, chopped, not too small, about half-inch pieces. And I'm gonna put that in the bottom of the pan and give it a little bit of a toss. And I wanna show you what a difference that's made already. So you can see the onions have picked up the color and the pan doesn't have a lot of stuff left on the bottom. So I'm gonna add a little bit of red wine to that, just to help get the rest of the little bits off the bottom. And when we're done, this pan should look almost perfectly clean because we want to get all the good stuff out of the bottom of the pan and keep it in our food where it's going to add so much flavor. I'm going to go back to our first pan. I'm going to add back in our pieces of meat, and I'm turning them on their side this time instead of flat on the bottom like I was cooking them this way before. Now I'm going to turn them so they're vertical and I can fit more of them in the pan that way, in the pot. And then we're going to add a little bit more seasoning. I've added back in all of our pieces of meat, and I kind of skid them up wherever possible in the bottom of the pan. And I'm going to add some red wine. I had some leftover Menage a Trois. This is just a soft red blend. And this is about a cup and a half. If you're only doing a single recipe, you probably only need about 3/4 of a cup. But you can always add more. Wine doesn't do anything but add flavor. And then we're going to add our onions. We took our onions, we sauteed them up, we collected all the bits off the bottom of the pan. And I'm also going to add those. I do want to mention the onion. This is the onion that I used, and as you can see, I was not exaggerating. This is almost as big as a grapefruit. This is a sweet onion. In lieu of adding sugar, I'm going to be using a sweet onion and some carrots. And then we did add a little bit of red wine, and that'll also make it a little bit sweeter and offset some of that acid. So you can use any kind of onion that you like. White onions have a little bit more of a sharp taste, and so do red onions. But I personally like the sweet onion or a Vidalia type onion for this dish. I'm also going to add a few pieces of garlic in there so that that has time to to mellow and add some flavor as well. This pan is so heavy, it's hard to do it one-handed. Okay. I need to go to the gym more and cook less so I can lift these things. And then there is a little bit of jus in the bottom of the bowl where I had the pieces of meat resting. And I want to include that too because every drop of liquid or juice or fluid is going to make that taste even better. So let me show you what this looks like now. And then I'm going to put a lid on it. We're going to turn it way, 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 way low. This is where if you were doing it in a crock pot, you would want to transfer it all to a crock pot now. But just like I did with the onions and the liquid and the bits on the bottom of the pan, I would do the same thing to this pan and take all of that juice and all of that flavor and transfer it to the crock pot. So I am gonna add a little bit of salt and pepper, which I haven't done yet. And we've got a pretty fair amount of meat. So I would say probably half a teaspoon of salt to start. You can always add more if you'd like. It also depends on whether or not the tomatoes that you use have salt in them. I always use the no salt diced tomatoes from Trader Joe's, and those don't have salt, so you can afford a little more if you like that. I'm going to add the 2 cans of diced tomatoes, and I will show you before I put a lid on it where we are now, so that from that point going forward you can see how the meat breaks down and the flavor develops. Short ribs are kind of a tough cut of meat, so they do have to be cooked low and slow if you want the meat to fall off the bone and really give you that luscious, deep, rich flavor. I'm also going to throw in a couple of bay leaves. I think 3 or 4. I like a lot of bay leaves. I know people usually only add 1 or 2, but I like the flavor, so I'm going to add 4 big ones. Okay, and then we're going to add the tomatoes, so hold please. This is what we have now. This is our starting point, and as I said before, this is where you would transfer it to a crock pot if you were going to do that. But if you're going to cook it on the top of the stove on a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever day off you have, this is where you'd want to let it have time to simmer for a good 3 to 4 hours, or until the meat is almost ready to come off the bone. We are on to the next step of our short rib and pasta dinner. I decided that I'm going to make some homemade pasta from scratch for this recipe, and I'm using a recipe that I learned from Martha Stewart. It's very simple. It's 2 cups of flour, 3 eggs, some salt, and olive oil. And I'm going to show you how to do it the way she does it in the food processor, because it makes it very quick and easy. So we're going to start with 2 cups of flour, and this is a little bit dirty because I pre-measured the flour to make sure it would fit. It's such a tiny food processor, I wasn't sure that I could even fit 2 cups of flour in here, but it does fit, even though it's probably not going to leave us a lot of room for mixing. So I'm just going to scoop this in. So this is 2 cups of flour. And we are going to add our salt now. And you can measure with a teaspoon, or you can do it the way my mom showed me, which is just a little bit in the palm of your hand. It is right about the right amount of salt. And you always want to make sure and add a little bit of salt to your pasta so it has flavor. And I'm going to go ahead and add 1 egg now. And then we'll do the other 2 after we mix it up just a little bit. So I'm just going to seal it up, and we're going to blend for just a minute. We're going to add 1 more egg. And you have to add each egg individually. And this is the 3rd egg that we're adding now, and you can see it's starting to get pretty full. A larger food processor would definitely work better for this. And I don't want to over mix, so I am gonna probably do a little bit more by hand, and I'm going to add about a tablespoon, maybe a little bit less, of olive oil. And I think it's had enough of us. We've kind of worked that poor little motor just a bit. Now, this didn't work quite as well as hers did because she had an appropriately sized food processor. And I love my little small one because it doesn't take up a lot of room. For projects like this, it probably would be nice to have a bigger one. So this is going to be half food processor and half manual. But you can see the parts where it started to blend. I'm just going to pull it all together and work the moist egg portion with the drier portion. And I'm not necessarily kneading, I'm just trying to kind of mix it all in together. You definitely don't want to overwork the pasta, you just want to add enough moisture to it and get it blended enough that you have all of your ingredients and they're sticking together. So to mix it together, I'm doing a very light knead, but I'll show you what that motion looks like. You press with one hand, and as you begin to roll away, you take your other hand and press and push, press and push, press and push, fold, press and push. That's about it. It's very simple. Our dough looks great. I'm gonna wrap it in some saran wrap and chill it for just a little bit so that we can roll it out in a few minutes. Before we start, I wanted to show you a little idea that I came up with to dry the pasta. The last time I made pasta, I was hanging it anywhere that I could because I didn't have a rack. And the other day I was at Ross and I saw this slacks hanger, and these lift out and twist. So I thought I could do multiple layers with this and not have them overlap each other. And I wrapped them in wax paper with a little bit of tape on it. And so I figured I would start with the bottom rack and put my first row on top of that and then pull them out from there and stagger them. So we're gonna try this together and see how it works. Fingers crossed. Our pasta has chilled. It's been in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes. It's still a little bit soft. I did add a fourth egg because I was having a hard time making it stick together. And then when I added that fourth egg, it made it a little bit more soggy. So I added about 1/4 cup more flour. So it's not the exact recipe that I gave you in the beginning. We ended up with 2 cups of flour and 4 eggs. I'm sorry, 2 1/4 cups of flour, 4 eggs, a tablespoon of oil, and a teaspoon of salt. So now what I'm gonna do is take some flour, put it on my rolling pin, put a tiny bit on my countertop, and we're gonna start rolling this out. It's nice if you can keep it as square as possible, so I kind of try to square it up before I start. And you wanna get it as thin as humanly possible, because the thinner you make your pasta, the more tender it will be when you cook it. If you make it too thick, it ends up being kind of chewy and not in a good way though. Okay, and the way that you know that you have rolled it out enough is when you can almost see your countertop through it. So I'm gonna apply a little more pressure. This is a very, very old rolling pin. This was my mom's, and this has been around longer than I've been alive, and I am no youngster. So I'm gonna keep rolling until I can almost see the countertop, and you can see how much longer and bigger this is than when we started. Don't be afraid to apply pressure. I wanted to show you a close-up of what I mean when I say you can almost see the countertop through it. See how this part's a little thicker? You want to almost have a little bit of transparency to the dough as you're working with it, because that's going to make your pasta just about the perfect thickness when you're all finished. So this looks pretty good. It's nice and thin. If you have a pasta machine, It'll save yourself a lot of time and effort. But I wanted to show you that you don't always need a ton of fancy equipment to make stuff like this. I mean, you know, our grandmothers did it without any of that, so we can too. So I did buy this really cute zigzagged trimmer from Sur La Table, and I'm just gonna trim this first edge off so that I have a clean edge to start with. And I'm gonna use, this is my crepe spatula. This was also my mom's, which is why it's a little worse for wear. This is probably from the 50s. I'm gonna lay it down on top of my pasta and use it as a guide so that my pieces end up somewhat even, because that way they'll cook more evenly. So as you can see, we end up with kind of a pretty little zigzag on our pasta. And I'm gonna put this on our drying rack, and I'm gonna just keep cutting our pieces and rolling out the pasta. And we'll let it dry out a little bit, and then we will be ready to cook it. I have to say, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself right now. This worked out beautifully. It's a little bit tilted because now all of the weight is in front of the hanger instead of balanced. And I did put this towel behind it so that the metal rack wouldn't scratch the glass on my wall oven. But I'm gonna let these continue to dry, and we're gonna cook them up when the short ribs are ready. But they look pretty great. I'm very excited with how well this worked out. We are about 2.5 hours in, and you can see that the meat has pulled away from the bone beautifully. And we're still gonna let these go just a little bit longer. I'm gonna add the carrots and then stir those in. And we will check back in about 30 minutes, and I think we're very close to ready. We're back and we're almost done. We have water boiling. We're gonna add a little bit of salt, and that's gonna be for the pasta that we made, our homemade pasta. And I'm gonna grab that rack. So this is the final tray of our homemade pasta. This worked out so well. I was really proud of how it came out. So I'm just gonna take these and drop them in individually so that they don't stick. And the water is at a nice boil. And then we'll just kind of keep an eye on these and check them every few minutes just to make sure that they're cooking properly and they're not sticking. When you first put them in, you got to give them a stir to confirm that, to make sure they're not sticking. And these look really good. These are about 1-inch ribbons, and then we cut them with that jagged zigzagged edge, which I think came out really nicely. And I'm just gonna keep dropping the pieces of pasta in one by one, mixing them up so that they're not sticking together. So considering we didn't have a fancy pasta drying rack, I'm pretty happy with how that worked out. I'm gonna check these in about 5 minutes, and we'll take a little piece off of them and make sure, see how they're cooking. I pulled out all of our short ribs from the pan, from the big pot, and I put them in here. Some of the bones have actually separated from the meat because they're that tender. They're falling off the bone, which is great. Now you could let this cool if you wanted and pick the rest of the meat off the bone and mix it into the sauce. There's a pretty fair amount of fat on the top layer of this because it's beef, and beef always makes more fat than almost any other meat. So you can skim it a little bit like what I'm doing, and as long as it's a clear golden liquid, then it's pretty much just the fat. You can start to tell when you're getting more than that because you see chunks or more of a brown liquid in the bottom. So if you wanted to, you could let this sit overnight, the sauce separately, and then just skim it, and that would work really well too to get rid of some of the fat. If you don't mind the fat, it will emulsify when we thicken it. So this is not necessarily a step that you need to take if you don't mind the extra fat grams. But if you have a sensitive stomach or you just don't want that much fat to it, then I would recommend that you do a little bit of skimming like I'm doing right here. I mixed up a little bit of flour and water. So this is about 2 heaping tablespoons of flour and a half a jar of water, which is about a half a cup. And the water has to be cold if you don't want your flour to get lumpy. And I'm just going to take a spoon and pour this in slowly, and this will thicken it. You could also add a little bit of cream if this is too acidic for you. Cream will change the flavor a little bit as well, but I like it a little more tomato based. So I'm just adding a little bit of this flour water mixture until it starts to thicken. You can always tell when the starches are cooking out of the flour water mixture because the broth becomes clear again. So when you first pour it in, it's sort of white, and then as you stir it through, it starts to become clear and the viscosity of your sauce changes and becomes a little bit thicker. We want it to be thick enough that it's going to stick to the pasta, because that is what makes it taste so yummy. So you can see how the viscosity of this has changed significantly since we added the flour water mixture. And I'm going to let this cook for just a couple of minutes until the pasta is finished, and then I'll serve it and show you what it looks like. We have our sauce, we have our pasta that's been drained, and these look absolutely incredible. I'm going to take these big thick strips and put them in my sauce so that they have a chance to gather up some of the delicious sauce and get coated really well. And then I'm going to serve it in the bowl with a stack of meat on top, and you will see what that looks like in just a second, so hang tight. All right, we're ready to serve. So I'm going to take some of this pasta and I'm going to twist it the way they always do to make it look pretty, and take a pretty decent pile of the short rib meat, and then a nice ladle of the sauce, and spoon that over the top. Maybe one more little bit of ladle of the sauce, and some Parmesan cheese. There you go, guys. That's it. It really wasn't that complicated. It just took a long time because the meat had to slow cook. But if you work on this earlier in the day and let it go, whether it's in the crock pot or in the pot, you don't have to make your own pasta. You can always just buy a pasta out of the package and cook it up. I personally like it. I buy mine at Home Goods, or I look for some at Trader Joe's that's made in Italy, because their products usually have fewer chemicals than ours do. I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and if you have enjoyed this or any other recipe on our channel, I hope that you'll hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to share with your friends. We always appreciate those referrals, and that's how our channel is growing so quickly. Thanks so much, guys. Take care. We'll see you soon.